What's up, guys? So I wanted to make a video response to a comment that I got, which was I was originally going to make a written response, but I felt like this would be really way more, informative and would reach more people if I did a video. So this is a comment I got on a video I dropped with Matty, where he was talking about lots of aim theory and stuff, and the comment reads as such. Matty's takes on muscle memory are terrible. I understand this guy may be an elite level player, but a lot of this information is genuinely bad. This is just a young elite player. He should take his own advice and realize that he is an outlier here, and that the majority of pro players will tell you that you should not be jumping around with your sensitivity and grips. So this is a comment that is going to be great to respond to, because there's actually a lot to this, and there's some misconceptions, some context is missing, and we're making some poor assumptions here. So let's kind of like just lay it all out and unpack it all. So the first thing to unpack is this sense that, should we, Matty says one thing, FPS esports pros say another thing. Who should I be trusting in this situation? So, and also the commenter, the lovely commenter, says that essentially Matty's an outlier, and he's essentially saying that FPS esports pros are not. And I actually think that it's much more likely to be the other way around here. And the reason is because let's just look at the two groups of people, like the aim trainer elite players and the FPS esports elite players. Because obviously Matty's not the only person that's really, really sick in the way that he's really good. So with the aim trainer players, their singular goal and focus as a community as well is to understand how to improve at aiming and how to get better scores than the aim trainers. And this is another misconception, so I'll just clear it up really quickly. And scores are important in aim trainers because they actually do confer to if your technique is improving, or if you're aiming better. Because if you are able to hit more targets more accurately, more quickly, which is what the score is, then it means your aim is improving in that skill category. It's just really as simple as that. Your mouse control is improving in that category. So they are just trying to push scores as much as possible. And the entire community is comprised of lots of individuals that are trying all of their own methodologies to try to accomplish the singular focus. So this is the one group of players. Now, the other group of players, the pros, FPS esports pros, I think it's much more likely that they are the talented outliers, because in fact, they're not singularly focusing on aim in this way, or studying it, or trying to communicate it to each other. Instead, what they're doing is they're trying to get really good at the game that they play. And so this is the one reason why a pro will tell you, oh, you should only, aim trainers are useless. You should only spend time playing the game. Now, this is legitimate feedback. And the reason is because that's how they got good. Because firstly, number one, aim trainer tools weren't around until 2018-ish. So it's still a very new thing. People haven't really understood, even until somewhat recently, how to train effectively with aim trainers. There's a lot of mystery there still, which the aim community is trying to decode, which is also a goal that I have on my channel, is to try to bring that knowledge that they're kind of gathering into to more people, so more can benefit. But their goal is to get really good at the game they're playing. So they're going to put all the reps and time into that game because they have to improve their micro, their macro. They've got to experience all of the different patterns, all the different ways you make decisions in these games. They have to really figure all this stuff out. And so the best way to do it is to keep playing that game. And their aim is going to kind of passively improve alongside that. Now, and sure, a lot of the pros are going to be messing around with their settings and figuring stuff out over time, but their experience of how they improve their aim is highly subjective. And again, it's not really the focus, and there aren't really many pros doing that many things very different to one another. So that's one thing also to bear in mind. So because of this, I think it's actually much more likely that the pros that got really good as players were able to continually, alongside improving their decision making and all that kind of stuff of the game, because that is a must that you must have. I would say that you can be a lot more at the top level. There can be a bit more disparity with your aim, to be honest, than there can be with your decision making, because you're also operating in a lot of these games in a team environment. And so if your decision making is bad, then you're not going to survive in those top team environments. You have to have good decision making that is on par with the rest of the team. Otherwise, it's just going to fail. And you will not find yourself as a pro player for too long. So the mechanics tends to be something that is, I would say, there's a bit more of a disparity there. But at the same time, you still have to be talented enough to perform at that level. And given that most pro players are not singularly focusing on that one thing, it is just one part of many cogs in the machine that makes a pro. It is going to be something that I would say it's going to be the naturally talented people that are more likely to be the pros in this situation, because they are more likely to get higher return on aiming skill improvement over time with the reps they're putting in the game, especially because the reps that they're putting in is mostly not focused on getting super sick aim. Essentially, in comparison, the amount of time a pro might spend trying to improve their aim versus actually playing is a huge disparity. And there's many pros that don't even play deathmatch or do anything at all for it. So there you go. There's my retort for that particular criticism. So the next thing is to think about this idea of changing your sense and sensitivity, your setup, and all these different things. Now, this is important for us to understand the context of what it is to be a pro and how they exist versus what it is to be an aim trainer player and in what they're doing. And so we have to understand a few things. So with the pros, we have to understand that what they are min-maxing for, what they're trying to optimize for, is performance on the day. And generally speaking, you have different phases of your of essentially like build into the performance. I would say you've got your kind of off-season period, or periods when you can make changes. Then you've got your sort of practice period where, like, you're scrimming and it's appropriate to say, to pause a scrim and say, okay, guys, we need to change this thing. We've got to adjust, these various bits. You should be doing this, all that kind of stuff. Reviewing all the stuff that you're doing. Then you get into the actual, day of performance, and you're singularly focused on execution. And you also want it to be the case that everything that you've been doing in practice is like highly habituated, so that you have all of these habits to fall back on. So you can automatically just do it when you're in the match. And there's a few reasons for this. One, because of comfort. Two, because you're in a highly distractible environment when there's a lot of pressure. And if you think about what performance actually is, in the most simplest form, performance is all about focus. Because performance is about the translation of all of the stuff you've done in practice into the now, and that requires focus. And so you want to have 100% of your focus, if you can, on what you're doing. And if you're in your flow state, that's where you're going to be. You're going to be in your 100% of focus. Now, again, this is a kind of a simplistic way to look at it, but if you have pressure that's coming in, what pressure tends to do is it tends to create distractibility. So this can be in the form of mental game leaks, or it can be in various different, like, you're just noticing things around your environment. Basically, you're not focused. The cameras are over there. You're like, you can see them in your eye. Oh, that's different. This is one thing that gets people. It's like, oh, this is a different environment. What I'm like looking at there is different. So that feels different suddenly. And so now that's in my head. So like any amount of what's in your head that's not just focused on executing in the game is going to decrease your ability to perform. And so if we take the Boros situation where, where the Falcons were kind of giving him a lot of shit for changing his mouse, what's really going on there is an inability to deal with that distractibility. And that distractibility can come in lots of different forms. So it can be this like external situation where, there's pressure coming in because of the fans or a different environment, whatever it might be. Could be that you've had like a lot of shitty matches lately or whatever, and so you feel a bit more pressure because of that. Or it could be the case that you're kind of having an internal experience, like you're missing shots, and that's like harming your confidence. Now, if you don't have the correct way to deal with that, then you're going to be making mistakes. You're going to be coping in some way. And I would imagine that what we saw with Boris's case is that he is internally and mentally trying to cope and blaming the peripheral, and so he's changing the peripheral to try to remedy that, and to get his to basically kind of like cheaply cheaply get your confidence back. Basically, it's kind of like that whole thing where like, oh, it's just we're getting wrecked. This guy's we have no confidence in this match. Let's just like swing them. Just because you're trying to like win your confidence back. This is just a mixture of mental game leak and the tool, a lack of tools not being applied correctly to deal with it, the correct mental prep not being done in the past. It can also be team environment that could be a problem here as well. Team environments can help massively when you're having mental game issues, or they can also be, they conversely can be damaging too if you're having mental game issues, depending on the scenario. You could even hear it when they were talking in the sort of huddle where they were saying, talk to us. There may be a reason why Boris doesn't want to talk to them. For example, there could be something wrong there. The atmosphere the environment might be bad for him for some reason. No idea. It can be lots of different things, but ultimately what's happening there is a mental game leak, and he's blaming his peripheral. And at least that's kind of my what I saw from that situation. You as a pro player don't want to be in a position where you're thinking about any of that shit. And this is why pro players will not want to change anything, because it just gets into your head very easily. And there is no reason, I think any pro essentially knows it doesn't really make a difference if you change stuff at all. And so just to avoid that completely as a thought that can enter your mind, pros don't want to change shit, and you shouldn't. Like, as a rule, generally you shouldn't be changing shit. You should never change shit on the day of your performance. You shouldn't be changing shit in practice, because what you're doing in practice is you're habituating yourself for what you're going to be doing in the match day, on the match day. So this is the reason why the pros will want to do this. And so there is a time in the year, in the calendar year, that pops up for pros where they can change shit. As I mentioned, the off season, and this is one way I would handle this before, is that if I have like a gap between leagues and I take a break after a league is finished, maybe I've got like a month before the league starts up again, I would give myself like a time limit that I would set. I'm like, okay, I'm going to iterate on the things I wanted to change in that last season, or I felt like I had issues with. So I'm going to give myself 2 weeks. I'll make those changes to my config, to my setup. I wanted to try this different mouse. At the end of the 2 weeks, where I'm just going to focus purely on my mechanics or whatever it is to like feel out these problems. At the end of 2 weeks, whatever I land on, I'm happiest with, I lock it in for the rest of the season. And that's how it goes. And I'm not, at that point, forever hold your peace, not thinking about it again. This is more of the mindset of how most pros are going to be thinking about like changing grips and sensitivities and mice and all these different things. So when the commenter's talking about Matty, where he's talking about how you improve tools that you can use to improve your aim, and how there is a misconception about sensitivity, the point is being missed here. Because there's two major points here that Matty's making. One, sensitivity is a tool to help you to improve your technique more quickly, so you get faster benefits from your aim training. And two, it doesn't fucking matter what your sensitivity really is. It's not important. There are so many players that get driven nuts almost by like like they're trying to change their sens, not for training purposes, but because they think that there's going to be a perfect sens that they can play on that will fix everything. And so this is really the reason why we're trying to get away from this idea that muscle memory is something that really helps us. Because instead, if we look at how it really works, and this is what Matty is saying and what the aiming community has evidence to back up with through all the work that they've done and through the results that they have, is that technique is king, sensitivity is second. So as you can see from how I've explained these things, these are separate issues that have been misapplied without looking at the context of what's happening. You have to get granular with this stuff. And so I think that kind of covers all of this, because this is an important point, because I should expand this for those of you listening that aren't sort of maybe as dialed into some of the aiming content. So if we look at how sensitivity can be beneficial for training your aim or training your technique, because your brain adapts very quickly to your sensitivity changes. That is what Matty is saying. We are working on our technique. If we change our sensitivity, you can apply the technique with a new sensitivity and your brain will adapt very quickly. What matters most is the quality of the technique. That is what you're training. So why does like changing the sens actually help, as Matthew is suggesting? Now, an easy way to explain this is just look at all of the different FPS games and look at how in every FPS game you're going to get like a general average amongst the player population of sensitivity that is different. Now, in attack shooter like CS, Valorant, you're going to get slower sensitivities. In fast games like Overwatch, where there's much more verticality, or Quake and Fortnite and so on, you're going to get faster sensitivities. Things move faster in one game than the other. Each game requires a focus and emphasis on different skill categories in terms of mouse control. And so with these different skill categories, different sensitivities will have less margin for error for the skill categories that they are being applied to. So for example, if you have attack FPS, precision is everything. The time to kill is instant, essentially. If you shoot someone in there, they die. So precision is everything. If I have and I do have a really fast sensitivity, I play my Quake sens in Valorant because I love to be a bit of a sadomasochist in that way. If I make it the slightest error because with my sensitivity, because it's much faster, that slight error very slight error can be a complete whiff. Whereas if it's a slower sensitivity, it's not a whiff at all. So there's much less margin to error for the slower sensitivity. However, what you will find is because there's less reps in the game, in like CS or Valorant for tracking, players will have generally like their tracking skill will be lagging behind. And again, if we think about Matty in the aiming community, what are they doing? They're trying to get good at like all aiming skills. So they change their sensitivity because not only does sensitivity allow them to have more consistency with certain aiming categories, it can also be used to help you to train different techniques. Now, for example, something that I had to go through to improve my overall aiming floor was, with your arm, you got your arm, you've got your wrist, and you've got your fingertips in terms of your tools, your three main tools in terms of aiming. Now you can use these in various different ways. If you have a very slow sensitivity, you're going to be using a lot of your arm because you need to move the mouse with a lot more range of motion. Range of motion that's too limited with just the wrist movements. So you're using way more arm. If you have a way faster sensitivity, like I have had in my career, then I have not ever really necessarily had to use my arm at all. So my arm control is undertrained completely, or it was. And similarly, this is what oftentimes is advised. After talking with some of the aiming coaches about what are some common errors that TAC FPS pros have. It's underutilization of fingers. Why? Because sensitivities are so slow that generally speaking, most players are very arm dominant. So by changing our sensitivity, we get into this really interesting spot where we're able to very specifically force ourselves out of a different habit. So I train on a sense that's way slower. I'm now forced to use my arm until I start to get good at arm control. If I use the same sensitivity, same fast sends, and just try to force arm control, I am fighting so much conditioning that it becomes a lot harder to actually create some technique with arm control. So it's way easier to actually just instead do it with the slower sensitivity. Okay, so there we go. I hope this kind of be a conclusion and wrap it up. Essentially, I think the aim trainer players know a lot more than people give them credit for. I think that changing sense and mouse and everything else is very useful for training, but understand that training should be in specific windows if you're a pro, and that if you're locked into your whole like tournament season, you shouldn't be changing anything, especially not on the day. There are some exceptions, I would say. If you should always have spares if you're in an environment which is like very humid. Maybe you do want to have another mouse pad potentially available, or different skates like that. Just depends. But it's quite subjective. But generally speaking, you know what you can handle as a player. So stick to that. I hope this was helpful, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.